Thanks for coming. It's a great pleasure. It's a really great pleasure to be here, but not just in the conventional sense, but also because I learned my first bits of economics at PSE, and I was a brash mathematician, and I liked math, but I knew I didn't want to do that all my life. So I said, okay, let's learn something maybe of practical relevance, and I learned some economics, and the first week. And it's a true story. My first week of economics at PSE kind of decided my revolt and my fire for the rest of my life. So we'll see why. And I'm still trying to soothe those early childhood traumas. So you'll see what I mean by that. So kind of started not quite with this one and that one. So let me start with this one. So it was teaching out of Blanchard Fisher, so straight at the PhD level economics. What's supposed to happen in an economy where you have a representative agent and your capital is not yet at the steady state. And what's supposed to happen? Well, you form the optimality conditions as on the Hamiltonian and nice things like that. And then if you start off, you're going to diverge and things are going to explode. And so agents are supposed to, aided by some fantastic god yet unidentified, boom, jump to the saddle path, and then they're on the saddle path, and then they converge. I say, okay, the math are kind of nice, so it's sort of useful to have math to talk about things, but it's completely unbelievable. It just cannot be true. And as I was asking the teacher, is it just, chapter 2, and then it makes it much more realistic in chapter 10? No, it's like that all the time. And I was, wow, it cannot be true. And then another one, and I'm going to go back to this one today, both will know a little bit, is the life cycle model. So what's the life cycle model? It's, you live for a finite number of periods, maybe 60 periods, 60 years, working life, and or post-adolescence life. And then you earn something, maybe 100, and then you retire to domestic age 40, and then you, 40 plus 40 period, and then you earn some deterministic amount of income, and then you die. And then what the agent is supposed to do is calculate the present value of income, the present value of consumption, optimize, and exactly find the exact amount of savings, and then this way you'll have a flat consumption. I say, okay, this is kind of nice, first childhood story, but it cannot stop there. This is incredible. And I said, no, this is what you do. You can change the preferences, maybe like hyperbole discounting, but the rationality is what you do. Say, this is a crazy discipline. All the issues are so important. So I'm passionate about the issues of that. But the tools we use to answer those issues are so unbelievable. So there ought to be a better way to do it. And I thought it would take 5 years. Well, I'm still at it, but I'm still trying to make progress on that. So this is a little bit what I'm doing. It relates to, so it's like a research program in behavioral economics, if you want more of a bounded rationality type. So it relates to there's lots of successes of behavioral economics, but as an observation, most of them really are in, you change the taste, like you say people are hyperbolic, or they have a taste for fairness or something, or you change the beliefs, like you say they're overconfident or extrapolative, but you don't really change the rationality per se, okay? So part of it is trying to, now there's quite a few people, the research teams attacking the rationality problem. It's another way to do it, and it's meant to be, somewhat unified and useful for macro. So anyway, after all this time, and I was thinking, I have only one published paper to show for it, but I still don't give up. So it's this one, and I'm going to talk about this one, about micro and about macro. So the paper in the QJE, where I try to do basic. Before you do basic macro, first I was trying to attack basic macro, but when to attack basic macro, you have too many ways to do it. So I thought it useful to do basic micro, like consumer theory and Arrow-Debreu and all that. But even when you do basic micro, like consumer theory, there are still too many ways to go. So I thought it useful to do more basic decision theory, where you think from at a very general level, how would you do a behavioral version or bounded rational version of maximization of utility subject to a budget constraint. Almost all, 90% of economics problems are kind of like that. So what's a behavioral version of that? And I'm going to show you one of them. And the end product is you give me any smooth smooth problem where people maximize subject to a budget constraint. I give you a behavioral version where people maximize over the same action, but they're behavioral. So they won't pay attention to necessarily all the little dimensions of the world. They may even get it wrong on some big dimensions. And then once you have that, you can still do regular economics and see what happens to equilibrium and edge of boxes and all those things, but with this form of bounded irrational agents. And then once you have a macro, you can do actually more work to do dynamic programming type macro, and we to talk about that. And then you can also think about public economics, and we do something like that with Emmanuel Fari in a much more general setup, and other things in the works. Anyway, so that's what I'm up to, and I want to show you some of that. So I call that sparsity-based. What does sparsity even mean? So it's just a name. If you have a vector with 1 million components, and almost all of them are 0, that's going to be a sparse vector. And here it will be the agent will form a sparse model of the world. So we understand the world has thousands and millions of dimensions. But of course, when we as economists do that, we reduce enormously the number of dimensions. Okay, and I'm going to say the agent. So we build a sparse model, a low-dimensional approximation of the true world. And I'd say the agent is a bit like us. He builds a simplified model of the world in his mind and acts on that. And then you look at how does he do that, and then what are the consequences of that for micro, and then for macro. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so the roadmap. So in the remaining 45 or so minutes, we're going to do all the basics of micro and all the basics of macro. So with bounded rationality. Okay, so it will be more light overview. I will not go into any technical thing. I will present things at a fairly light and relaxed level, but you can make the math super rigorous and prove complicated theorems if you want. Okay, and so I'm going to talk about the sparse max. So how do you maximize subject to a budget constraint in abstractly, and then we're going to apply that to how you do Varian or the basic chapters of Maskell-Wheatstone grid, and then we can talk about basic consumption savings, including this life cycle, and then I flag some things about the RBC model, like this initial this graph with transversality paths and those things. Okay, so let's start with a very simple example, just to keep have some concrete things in mind. And a few of you have already heard me talk about this, so I apologize. So let's say you maximize just a utility function with no budget constraint. And let's take a concrete example. So it's u of ax, you maximize over a, and x is a vector of disturbances. Here it's a minus sum of a mu I xi squared. So what would you do if you have a rational agent? Well, you just maximize that quadratic function. So the AR, the rational action, is sum of a mu I xi. Maybe there's 1 million of xi's. Okay? Generically, but lots of little things that matter for your choice, the price of a good, your wealth, the interest rate, the volatility of interest rate, future taxes, your health, your mortality rate, etc., etc., etc. And maybe you don't take all those things into account as you decide, because maybe you don't. So how do I model the act of you don't take into account, and then can you do optimal attention to things? Okay, and it will be optimal behavioral attention. Okay, so it's not just information economics; it's meant to be a little psychological, and it's much easier to do than the complicated Bayesian games of information economics. Anyway, so I say just in terms of notation, what the agent is going to do, it will be all endogenous. He's going to his action will be the same action, sum of a mu I xis. So what's s? Xis? It's the sparsified maybe xi, or the subjectively perceived xi, and so it's the true xi times mi, where mi is an attention parameter. So mi equals 1, you're fully the rational agent. Mi equals 0, you don't pay attention, you put a weight of 0 on xi, think the xi's are drawn from a mean zero distribution, and so this way you don't take into account the xi. Okay, and so there's an issue of we'll talk about how do you choose some optimal attention m. Okay, another example I will use when I do like Arrow-Debreu and consumer theory is inattention to prices. So think there's a true price of good I, okay, maybe it's drawn from a mean distribution with mean PID. So there's a succession of kind of IID economies, and the average price is the PID, the default price. And then today the innovation is XI, okay? And so the price is different from the mean by xi. And now you may not fully pay attention to the price. What does it mean? It means you subjectively here perceive price will be the default price plus you perceive only a fraction of today's innovation. So an intensity fraction mi of today's innovation. Okay? And so we're going to endogenize this mi. So how do you do that? So to do,
can it be above 1?
mi endogenously will be below 1, but conceivably you could imagine, the math is generous enough. You could imagine you could entertain below 1, but in the results it's going to be below 1 or weakly below 1. Okay, so I give you just a few glimpses of a style of microfoundation, but I just don't have the time to do it well, but hopefully it's done reasonably well in the published paper. Okay, so let's say you maximize just, so far no budget constraint, you maximize the utility function u of ax. A is your action, as x is this potentially large vector of disturbances. And you form an attention-augmented decision utility. So you have a vector m of attention, and almost always I will just say you put m1 in front of x1, mn in front of xn. Okay. And what the agent is going to do, he's going to, after he's formed his optimal allocation of attention, m, I will talk about that soon, he's going to just take the action that seems to be the best at face value, if indeed this is the perceived vector of the world is this vector of mixi. So he maximizes that decision utility. So what the experience utility is going to get? Well, he's going to take this action, but also the true vector, the true disturbance, the true vector state of the world is this x. So what everybody has been writing since Herbert Simon kind of talked about boundary rationality is you want to do something like that. You want to maximize, it's not what I'm going to do, but this is approximately. You want to maximize over this attention policy M, the expected utility you're going to get, maybe minus the cost of attention. Okay? And for the cost of attention, I just take a very simple Cobb-Douglas, kappa mi to the alpha. The optimal alpha will turn out to be 1, like in Esther's lasso. But anyway.
So in the expectations you take over what?
Over the distribution of x's. So, so their variance, for instance, will matter. They have mean 0. Here they've been normalized to have mean 0. Okay, so, but now, this is not what the agent is actually going to do, because if you want, it's too complicated. So what the agent is going to do in this sparse max, it's at the stage where he chooses attention, he's going to not solve this problem, he's going to solve a somewhat arguably simpler problem. He's going to solve he's going to take a linear quadratic approximation of his utility, okay? And he's going to imagine evaluated at the default. This is the default is when all the x's are 0 or all the attentions are 0. And so it knows very well his utility, linear quadratic approximation of his utility at this default point where all the x's are 0. And then he's going to solve the optimal allocation problem with that surrogate utility. That will give him some candidate optimal attention. He's going to take that optimal attention and then maximize his true utility with that. So let me unpack what I said here.
It still knows the whole distribution of the x.
It turns out that only the variance matters because when at the attention stage is linear.
But it knows the higher moments.
That's right. He knows the variance. He knows kind of.
So he still knows a very complex thing.
He knows exactly. He knows quite a bit, but
I mean, a
not.
lot of what happens in the world is not known. Unknown unknowns.
Ah, okay. Well, I like uncertainty aversion, Nightingale. Almost as much as you do, but it's not what I do here. But, okay, great. I like when I'm choosing apples and bananas, so I'm not like Nietzschean about apples and bananas. But anyway, okay. So now a little more technically, when you do that, you want to look at the quadratic expansion of this objective function for small x's, and it has a shape like that. And you see if what's that here? And so here I write it here. It's the Taylor expansion of the losses from inattention. We have small x's for lambdas that are there. Anyway, you massage things and let me not go there. And at the end, you get that the sparse max, following the description I gave, it comes of 2 steps. So step 1, you choose the optimal attention. Step 2, you choose the optimal action given your attention. And more. So this is the step 2. And the step 1, you minimize over the vector of attention the sum of 2 things. So the first term, this is a proxy for the losses. This is basically a proxy for the losses of inattention. This is if my attention is less than 1, let's full rationality, I'm going to lose some utils, and here they calculated here. But also, if I pay a higher amount of attention, I'm going to pay some attention cost. And here the important parameter is this kappa. So when kappa equals 0, the cost of rationality is 0, and then I'm fully the rational agent. And so always in my models in this series, you have a smooth parameter, and if you tune the parameter to 0, you're exactly the rational agent, and as you increase the cost of rationality parameter, you're more and more behavioral. Okay, so this is what the agent will do, and here you get this an object I'm going to unpack very soon. So let's see what this gives when you do that. So it gives a rise to an attention function. Okay, this cost of attention and this the way it's set up here gives rise to an attention function of the following. So if alpha equals 1, that's like Esther's lasso. I mean, it's not Esther's, but lasso used by Esther. So you get the following kind of penalty. So when the dimension I of a world, when this dimension of a world here, just take a generic dimension, is very small, so actually it will be a benefit to cost less than 1, then your optimal attention to it is exactly 0. So you have sparsity there. Generically, with heuristic number 0 in life is, just simplify the problem and don't think about most things. Okay, and then, however, when the dimension becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, you pay more and more attention to it. Okay, so now a little more generally, how do you sail through life when you maximize this utility function here? Your perceived xi will be mi the attention to xi, and mi it's equal to this. Okay, so what's that? Here you see dA dxi. So that's if I pay more attention to xi, if xi increases, how much does that change my action anyway? Okay, and then you have uaa. That's the curvature of my utility function. Okay, and a could be multidimensional. That's why it has this kind of matrix type shape. And this is sigma xi is the variance of xi. So it says if dimension I of a world becomes very, very important in the sense that it has high variance. For instance, inflation becomes very volatile or something like that. Then I'm going to think a lot about it. But when inflation becomes very subdued, then maybe my optimal attention to inflation will be 0. Okay, and what is this thing? It's up to a factor 2. It's those are the utility gains from thinking about xi when I go from 0 attention to full attention, at least at the Taylor expansion, the Taylor expansion way. So what you do, the kind of physical picture I invite you to have in mind is there's 10 million dimensions in the world. Dimension by dimension, you probably unconsciously you assess, is that important at all? Okay, is the temperature in Venezuela useful for my consumption today? Presumably not at all, though you could imagine a perverse G effect that would make it a little important. You say no, I won't pay attention to that, etc., etc. And a few things you will pay attention to. Okay, so with the price of a good, for instance, or how wealthy am I? Okay, so so in the quadratic example we started with, remember we had this quadratic loss function. The rational action, you would do your action would be some of the mixi, maybe of a 1 million dimension, and here the action of a sparse agent, and here there's a little s missing. You do some of the mu I sparsely perceived xi s, and so it's the xi times the attention, and the attention is just this. So you look at the normative slope of how important is xi for you, with the variance of xi. You compare it to this prefactor in the cost of attention kappa, and if this whole thing is less than kappa, boom, you don't pay attention to dimension I. Otherwise, you pay attention to it, maybe asymptotically 100%. Okay. So what did we just get there? We got a way to whereby you give me any smooth utility objective function here so far with no budget constraints. I give you a way, a proposal for how a bounded rational agent is going to behave in that environment. Okay, so I have not yet shown you it's particularly useful or true or something, but at the very least, it has a wide domain of applicability. Okay, wide but not wide enough, because what about the budget constraint? So, by the way, you might ask, what's an attention of 1/2? So remember, you have different nano foundations for this micro model, okay? But one of the nano foundations is maybe you receive, for xi, you receive a noisy signal for the xi, and then maybe you can pay more or less for the noise, and then you're going to form your optimal posterior about this xi given the noisy signal, and on an average, you're going to shrink your signal by this shrinkage factor, like in a Bayesian analysis, which is a ratio of variances, and that's how, on average, you might perceive the xi with a weight of 1/2, for instance. Okay? But you don't need that. This is one possible way to think about it. There are other ways to think about it, and it's not what I do literally, just one possible story in the background. Okay, but now what about budget constraints? Okay, so in particular, I want to talk about basic micro. So what about this basic problem, max of bolded C here, C1, C2, Cn, the vector of consumption. I want to maximize my utility subject to the budget constraint. This is sum of a PI, CI, less than budget. And let's remember the notations. So with the xi here, the average price of fix is a succession of independent IID problems. And but here's just one of them. So the price is, you can view it as being drawn from a distribution with mean xi d, like default. But the innovation xi today, and you perceive only you choose to perceive only a certain fraction mi of this xi. Okay, now there's a problem is, how do you satisfy the budget constraint? See, there's a problem is, suppose that on average you were under-perceiving the prices. So you're tempted to spend too much, but you're not allowed to spend too much because you have a hard budget constraint. So what do you do? So there are different ways to do it, and some I discussed in the previous lecture with Chetty, and here are generalized fully. So here's the one I found best in a number of ways, and realistic, but you could imagine others. So here's the one I will go through, use today. So remember how in basic micro, at the optimum, you have marginal utility for good 1 divided marginal utility for good 2 is equal to price of good 1 and price of good 2. Okay? So here the same thing will hold in this sparse agent, but in the space of perceived prices. So it could be ratio of marginal utilities. If I trade off, chocolate and coffee, the ratio of marginal utilities will be equal to the ratio of perceived prices, my perceived price of chocolate, perceived price of coffee. So this is what you write at the undergraduate level. When you're in the first year of grad school, you write that in a vector form. And so you say u prime of C as a vector, it's some lambda, some Lagrange multiplier, times the vector of perceived prices. It's saying the same thing. And what do you do in traditional rational economics? Well, for every lambda, you get a C, and then you tune the lambda so that if you follow that rule, you're going to exhaust your budget. Okay? So here in the sparse max, I'm going to say kind of the same thing, except now when I equate my marginal utility to prices, I equate them to perceived prices. Okay, it will be lambda times perceived prices, and then you tune the lambda so that you exhaust your budget under the true prices, not under the perceived prices. Okay, so you change. You have a perceived prices in all the first order conditions, but in the budget equation, then the true prices are there. Okay.
How do you do that?
So I'm going to come to that in 2 slides. Some concrete, more intuitive story. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to unpack this in the same 2 slides that were hopefully useful for Ricardo. Okay, and what I'm going to do. Okay. Yes. Okay, in 2 slides, hopefully that will be clear. Okay, and then once you have this thought for this problem, okay, why not? It sounds like a good idea. Okay, so if you follow the rule I kind of wrote here, here's what the agent will do in a slightly more concrete way, abstractly and then more concretely, and then hopefully that's going to be very concrete. So if you follow that, so what is that? It's the Marshallian demand. So I had forgotten my terminology. Marshallian demand. It's the vector of consumption you choose given the true prices and given the budget, W. Okay, so this is the Marshallian demand of this sparse agent, this particular type of behavioral agent. So his demand is going to be the demand of a rational agent who would face those subjectively perceived prices and would have a slightly different budget W prime, okay? And you choose the W prime so that if you follow that decision rule, you hit your budget constraint. Okay, so let's unpack that some more with some concrete examples. Okay, so imagine you have quasi-linear utility. So in many ways, that's the most tractable kind of thing. So what's quasi-linear utility? there's a last good, sometimes called money or savings, something like that has constant marginal utility. Here 1. Okay, Cn. And then you can be arbitrary, nonlinear in all the other goods. Okay, good. So what happens then for these agents? Well, for all the goods but the shock absorber good at the end, okay, the consumption of this agent is the consumption of a rational agent who just was confused about the prices, okay? And all the shock absorption in terms of, mistake in the budget, it's absorbed by the last good Cn. In practice, in a more macro context, your savings absorb, the discrepancy, so to speak, okay? So I think viewed this way, maybe it's kind of, intuitive. Another kind of polar opposite to quasi-linear utility is homothetic utility. So utility your consumption is proportional to your wealth. So then the demand of this sparse agent is same agent with different utility. The demand of this sparse agent is the demand of a rational agent who would face these wrong prices, except now you scale up and down the whole budget by maybe 0.95 if you were consuming too much.
So you don't let them deviate in the actual mean, the subjective mean or something like that.
So sorry?
That's a way of, you're saying you let them deviate in terms of prices, but not the mean of expected prices has to be right.
In certain sense, yes. Yeah, exactly. So to have a concrete example that's very metaphorical, but anyway, suppose you were at the supermarket. It's not optimized to be a model of supermarket behavior, but suppose you were at the supermarket, you have 100 euros to spend, and you have actually, because you didn't really pay attention to the prices of the things you put in your cart, you have the cashier tells you have 105 euros, okay? So sorry, sir, you have 105. Okay, so what do? So if your demand was linear in wealth, homothetic, you would just spend 5% of everything, less of everything, okay? But in the general case, this is an agent that's, he looks at, he has an angled curves and everything, so it's as if, asymptotically at least, he was $5 poorer, so he cuts down on consumption as if he was $5 poorer. So he's going to keep the necessity good, necessary good, maybe he had to bring back milk, but the luxury good, like this extra bottle of juice, he gives up on. That's what you get. Yeah. Okay, so this is, oh yes, sure.
So in your basket decision, so now you see all the prices.
Yes.
It's not a question of forming a forecast. So this guy seems a bit strange. He has made a plan initially based on some erroneous forecast.
Yeah.
You see the prices.
Yeah.
He keeps some strange rule that we are maybe familiar with in economics, equating the marginal. And then he do some, maybe it's nice mathematically, but I don't see the heuristic.
Oh look! I mean, take these those two things. I buy based on my perception, and then the savings are going to absorb the thing. Anyway, no, there's an issue.
But that's an important question. I mean, sorry, it's you're talking about rationality. So, what kind of psychological process you are talking about?
I'm talking about. I mean, I don't know if I have quite the time to go into. Those things fascinate me even more than they fascinate you, actually. But a little bit in terms of psychological forces, you have, limited attention. You cannot think about lots of things. You put in your working memory lots of things. But to choose attention, you can do lots of choice of attention in parallel. The whole literature on that. You get something that Kahneman Tracy called anchoring and adjustment. And let me read. People make estimates starting from initial value. Here's like the default value. And that adjusts to yield the final answer. Adjustments are typically insufficient. So that's a little bit, that's my m less than 1. The adjustments are insufficient. And for, and for this case, I think it makes some sense. Okay. But anyway, let me proceed. That's the, and you can do lots of things with it, and let me show you. Okay, and let me just, you can generalize the thought for the adjustment rule, and then you can, here just flag you some equations. These are, you can do it, okay? And then you have a way, you give me any smooth utility, any problem with smooth utility maxima subject to smooth budget constraint, okay? Then I have a bounded rational version of that, okay? And you can say maybe you prefer another one or something, but at least it always exists, so that's useful. Okay, so let me show you, for instance, so I like to make sure that all the canonical machines of economics, all the machines we use in economics all the time, you have a behavioral version of them. So here's what's the most canonical, what's most used in economics is maybe Cobb-Douglas utility, And this is the demand of a bounded rational Cobb-Douglas agent. So it's like the traditional, it's budget times alpha I, the weight, divided the perceived price, and then there's an extra adjustment for the budget. You can do CS and you can do any utility function. Okay, so let me now what do we have? We have a Marshallian demand, okay? And so we're going to do lots of micro, but before I go there, let me just mention one bit. You can also endogenize attention, and for the students over here, there's now quite a bit of theory on attention, and there's very, very little work, experimental work or even empirical work on that. So a big frontier, useful frontier, is estimated attention. Do those optimized models, do they work well or not? And you have a few predictions. If it's more volatile, the price of a good is more volatile, you pay more attention. If the expenditure share of a good is more important, is higher, you pay more attention. And we really don't know if that's true or not. Qualitatively, I think it has to be a little true, but is it exactly the scaling and all that? What's the shape of the attention function? We really don't know. Anyway, so there's fantastic research opportunities for that. Not just for my model, but there are other related models that they do somewhat less. Anyway, okay, so now we have a Marshallian demand function. So imagine we're in front of variant. Okay, I'm not sure which chapter variant, maybe 3 or so of variant. And now, armed with this Marshallian demand function, we're going to march through the remaining chapters, okay, subsequent chapters, to see what changes with this somewhat different Marshallian demand. So one of the objects, in terms of what's a bit non-trivial in economic theory, is this Slutsky matrix. So what's the Slutsky matrix? It's Sij is DCI dpj, and there's a typically small extra income effect term. So it's a compensated DCI dpj. For short here, I'll say DCI dpj, but with a compensator term. And what's really surprising in basic macro is that it's symmetric. So DC1 dp2 is DC2 dp1. Okay? And here I have some authorities saying it's a rather non-intuitive result. Maskell and Winston-Grid say it's not easy to interpret in economic term. It's beyond what you could do without math. Okay? And then you might say, well, look, if it's really hard to understand for Maskell and Krebs and company, maybe it's not true for real people. I don't know, arguably. Okay? So let's see what happens with those behavioral agents. So with those behavioral agents, so this is the Slutsky term. So this is the DCI dpj with the S of those particular type of behavioral agent, those sparse agents. So this is always true for any utility function, I think. The DCI dpj of a bounded rational agent is the DCI dpj of a rational agent times mj, where mj is the attention to the price. Okay, mj equals 1, you're fully rational. So first you see, you're going to get a deviation from Slutsky symmetry, because if mj is not mi, this will not be invariant by permuting I and j. But more importantly, it's a deviation from Slutsky symmetry that makes intuitive sense. And so what's the intuitive sense? Some level it's very trivial. It says, look, if you don't pay attention to the price pj, okay, well, all your DCI dpjs are going to be small with a compensation term. Okay? And so that's why DCI dpj will be small, but maybe DCJ dpi might be very big. Okay? So now, is that true? I have no evidence whether or not that's true. It's so intuitively clear that it's kind of something like that should be true, but it must be true somehow. Still, there's an indirect literature on like shipping charges and hidden charges and the like. And they say like you increase, people don't really pay attention to the shipping, that much attention to the shipping charge. So if you increase it, it doesn't really change how much of a good you buy. But if you increase the price of a good, then you buy less of a good and less of a shipping charge. And so this is big and this is small, though the two should be exactly equal with rational agents. It turns out that now there's 2 working papers looking at least a little bit, using a little bit that sort of thing, and finding evidence of for inattention using exactly deviation from this Slutsky symmetry. So there's a little bit of progress there. Those are very special setups. And in theory, actually, you can in principle recover all the attention weights from deviation from Slutsky symmetry at least up to a factor. So again, for the students here, ideally if you have a big data set and you could really measure all the attention weights from choice, not just from seeing how much their eye spends on this good or that good, but also from choice. And then you could test, maybe that theory, maybe other theories that might predict, maybe Phillips' theory, I don't know, but might predict things about how people choose their attention to the price, and we would know. But okay, great. Okay, so let's keep going. This agent it has a, okay. One thing that's, yeah, let me talk about that. So it exhibits nominal illusion. So it means what? It means that suppose I increase the price and the budget by 1.1. The agent is actually, in the rational model, if I increase your price and your budget by 1.1, you have fundamentally the same choice set, so you don't change your consumption. However, here, you are going to change your consumption, and why? Because let's say you pay a lot of attention to good 1, not a lot of attention to good 2, then you see, as both increase by 1.1 your budget also, you really see, the price of good 1 has increased a lot. The price of good 2, you don't really see this increased a lot. So you perceive the relative price of good 1 has increased, so you consume less of good 1, more of good 2. That's how I change your demand by just doing this neutral, what would be neutral change in rational economics. Anyway, you can now do arrow de Breu. Now I have n agents, I put them together and I let them trade. Okay, so welfare theorem 1, welfare theorem 2, sadly they don't hold. I'm not saying, by the way, it's a big deal, and Hugo Chavez, who's taking over the economy, I'm just saying you have second order losses when you have inattention, okay? So generically, basically, Pareto, an equilibrium will not be Pareto efficient because if there are some rational people who perceive the right ratios of prices and some behavioral people perceive the wrong ratios, they're not going to equalize the marginal utilities. And then a fortiori, the first welfare theorem holds, the second welfare theorem won't hold because after I do transfer, I won't go to a Pareto optimum, so I won't go, Okay. You get a few other things, let me not talk about them. You can do the Edgeworth box, and you can do something that's a little interesting. So let me not talk about that. Okay, we can do there's a Phillips curve in each Edgeworth box, and I will let you with that slogan. Let you think what this means. Anyway, let me finish on macro. I want to show you some macro because that's interesting. So what do you get? You get, at least for me, it was useful, at least some sense of what is robust and kind of believable in basic macro. It's robust to this type of deviation. This is what's really a little lunatic. We learn it, but it's, just... okay, so let me start pessimistic, and then I'll go optimistic. So pessimistic, things like, all the predictions are really surprising. They tend to be wrong, actually, when you have bounded rational agents, okay, roughly. So the Slutsky symmetry matrix is symmetric, okay? It's really wrong. As soon as you're even at the default price, it's wrong. Marginal demand homogeneous degree 0, wrong. Things like, at the equilibrium, there's only a locally one local equilibrium. It turns out that if you increase set prices because of this nominal illusion, if you increase all the prices, then people change their decision, so you get another, that's the Phillips curve, you get another allocation. That's the Phillips curve point. Now, however, there are things that are roughly true, but with second order losses, namely, people are roughly maximize their utility, but with second order losses, that's just the envelope theorem. Now, what is really robust is like Baker's style sign economics, okay? So he's saying that in the Slutsky metric, the signs are preserved. So it's things like, if the price of good 1 goes down, demand goes up. With a bigger incentive to do X, people will indeed do more of X. So the sign of those things is correct, and that's kind of the economics we use when we think very, very intuitively about the world. So that's valid, okay? But as soon as you have like more GE effects or more quantitative things, it's all hampered by, modulated by inattention, and it doesn't work. So anyway, so it's just some things I learned about basic micro. So now I want to show you some things about basic macro. And given the 10 minutes I have, let me just show you just a few glimpses, okay? So, okay. So here's how you might do here's how you do this very canonical problem. So you maximize the temporal utility, you have stochastic interest rate, stochastic income, and you have your budget constraint. So so there's 3 dimensions. How would real people do that? Okay, and in theory, they should, pay a lot of attention to the interest rate, be obsessively in the Euler equation of that. It's really kind of bizarre. Okay, and so I developed something called sparse dynamic programming in another paper, where at every stage I do dynamic programming, but at every stage I decide how rich my subjective model of the economy is. So I decide on, will I, for instance, pay attention to the interest rate today and the whole path of interest rate? or we have just replaced the path of interest rates by R bar, okay? And maybe, let's say when you buy, just a bottle of water or a shirt or something like that, you don't pay excessively a lot of attention to the interest rate to be on your oral equation for shirts or bottles of water, okay? And this is what this model does. So a little more formally, what happens, you give me any rational dynamic programming problem, okay? And I give you a behavioral version of that, so I put little m's in front of all the stochastic variables, and the agent does not a max, but a sparse max, okay? And so at each period, it chooses how much attention to pay to interest rate, income, taxes, etc. And then given that, also chooses his action, maybe consumption, labor supply. And that's a fairly general machinery you can use potentially lots of macro problems, and maybe it has a better, and I argue it has a somewhat better fit. So let me show you, because this was my childhood, one of my childhood trauma. So let's go back to this Bodigliani Bromberg paper. That's kind of the start of rational dynamic economics, okay? So what's that? It's, you have this conventional utility subject to conventional budget constraint. Here, normalized discounting and interest rate to 0%, just to keep the math very simple. And so you earn 100 early in life, and then you know you will retire at period 40. Maybe this is age 25, this is age 65. And then you earn 80. So, okay. So first, let's see what a rational agent does, and let's see what a behavioral agent, what he does. Okay, so a rational agent, I don't have time to go into all the math, but he needs to pay attention to this X. And so what's the X? It's this loss of income at retirement. Okay, so I say there's this X over there, this present value of loss of income at retirement. He really needs to pay attention to this thing if he's rational. And then, okay, if he's rational, indeed, what that period T is going to do is maximize flow utility plus continuation utility. And the continuation utility has your wealth and your consumption. And then this X, this future loss of income at retirement. Okay, and he maximizes that. That's a rational agent. This behavioral agent, he does almost the same, except he does a sparse max at every period. So he chooses consumption and optimal attention to this loss of income at retirement. You get closed form equations. And there's one free parameter for a whole lifetime. So let's see what it looks like for one value of a parameter. So if he was rational, his consumption would be flat over time. This behavioral agent, his optimal consumption and optimal attention is that. Okay. So early in life, his optimal attention with this equation to retirement is 0. So he just consumes his current income. And then when he's period 20, maybe he's 45, middle age, then the optimal attention to retirement starts becoming maybe 0.1. So he says, I kind of see it coming a little more. Okay, so he sees more coming, so he saves a little more, he consumes less. And then as he ages, he sees it coming more and more. Again, I do nothing, just the model calculates those things and this creates incentive to pay attention. Okay, pay more and more and more. So he sees the attention looming more and more and more. So he consumes less and less, saves more and more. Even actually a few days before retirement, he's not completely ready. It's optimal to pay attention only maybe 90% to retirement. And then consumption falls and then it's flat again. Okay, great. So now, is that true or not? So I'm going to talk about some econometric evidence and all that, but just before we go there, just intuitively, okay? Imagine that you were non-economist before you were all brainwashed about it. It sounds very plausible, at least. So, early in life, you bubble along, you don't really, there's a retirement somewhere, you really don't think about it. But at some point, you're 45, it's time to be a little serious, to be a grown-up, and you save, and you do the right thing, you open a checking account, save, a retirement account and all that. And then you're still not quite ready, and then you fumble a little bit, and then you see a shock. Now, a little more scientifically, with papers published in Econometrica and JPE and all that, some qualitative features of that hold true, though Aguirre and Hurst have a somewhat famous lines of papers saying, no, it's all rational. When you look at them, it's just the sign of rationality is the correct one. They never show the exact quantities of rationalities are the right one. And there's a very, very nice paper by two people going to Chicago, actually. And they show that if you look at the end of unemployment benefits, so a deterministic loss of income, you see exactly this kind of pattern, okay? And then they fit actually, this model slightly jazzed up for that. So part of my hope for bounded rationality modeling in practical cases is, say, for the student here, if you have a rich data set with microdata and all that, with things coming, now you can fit the traditional models. You can think a hyperbolic model, but we just fit a smooth curve, not at all this kind of discontinuities and all that. And you have now this practical way to do bounded rationality with one free parameter, and you can see exactly if it is better or not, and if it organizes the data a little better, and that's what those Ganong-Noel people do for unemployment. Anyway, in general, you have a whole complete, it's fairly easy to do with computers and all that. And in terms of, you can do the RBC macro, I didn't show you it, but you can do a Cleveland-Prescott with bounded rational agents and all that. And this agent, it looks a little bit like a hybrid between like a Lucas agent and an old Keynes agent. So like the Lucas agent is somewhat forward-looking and reacts to the incentives to things as well. But more like the Keynesian agent, he's reacts a lot to the present, and is not that forward-looking, and so it's a smooth way to keep good things. So hopefully it's a productive way to proceed, and so I invite all of you to do behavioral micro, behavioral macro, behavioral public finance, and it's lots of very concrete things, and it's not only interesting to fix the textbook, okay, but it's also interesting to hopefully get better policies and better empirical fit, and this will have a more believable economic discipline. Thank you very much. Yes?
How would you relate to the rational inattention approach by Sims and others? It's rather similar but different in some ways. And what are the similarities? What are the differences?
Yeah. So the similarities, we're all, trying to model imperfect attention, imperfect understanding, and all that. Sims persuaded people and did that. He bet all his money on a particular cost function, which is the entropy cost, and then being prisoner of optimal Bayesian updating. As a result, you can do it when you have linear quadratic utility or Cara-Gaussian utility, which is more or less the same thing. As soon as you're outside of that, it's completely untractable. And so even a very, very simple problem like maximization of a little utility with 2 goods or 3 goods with a budget constraint, nobody has been able to do it with a Sims type technology, because if you're outside of linear quadratic utility. So it's just more, at the very least, it's much more tractable. And now for some qualitative things, when you're linear quadratic, it's somewhat similar, but it applies to much more complicated things, and that's how I can do dynamic programming also and the like. Yeah. Yeah.
They have done some going beyond that.
Yeah. You can do it also when you have discrete choices. So you have discrete choice, I can do it. But the most basic problem in economics, you have U of C1, U of C2, U of C1, C2, and I maximize that, or maybe C3 also. And generically, you just cannot do it with the Sims. It's just too complicated. But on top of that, I want to do bounded rationality. And at some point, we need to be able to be free and not do optimal information processing with Bayesian agents, which is exactly what they do. So anyway, so I think it's good to explore those other things. That's what I do.
Last question.
Yes, Olivier.
How should we think of M? Should we think of it as something that the agent truly performs, or something that the analyst puts in to create some noise how people behave?
I'm not sure I completely got your distinction.
Well,
but
you're trying to modeling, maybe it's related to Philip's question, to boundedly with rational agent. And throughout the talk, you present it as if really people were performing that task.
Yeah. I'm happy with it, as if in the right places. Yeah. So if you want to say it's an idea, you can view those things as an idealization. If you really love Sims and Bayesian processing and all that, you could say this agent I showed, and there's some theory. What I'm going to say is exactly true with linear quadratic utility. It's a representative agent version of a population of agents who receive noisy signals. Okay. And it's just the representative agent version of that. But then my preferred interpretation, no, it's an idealization of people, and it's one agent that does exactly that. That's how I think it's cleanest to think about. We do idealization all the time in economics. Even equilibrium in supply and demand, where does it come from? Truly, maybe some tâtonnement, but we don't do that. We just say, okay, that's the situation where we are. Likewise here.
All right.
Thank you very much.